Catherine Marks stood before the full-length mirror in her modest bedroom, smoothing down the wrinkles in her navy blue dress. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the simple pearl necklace her grandmother had left her. Today was different from any other day in her 34 years of life. Today, she would meet the First Lady of the United States. The morning light streamed through her small apartment window, casting gentle shadows across the worn wooden floors. Catherine had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with anticipation and disbelief. How had a small-town teacher from Ohio ended up in this extraordinary situation? It all began 3 months ago when Catherine received a letter that would change her life forever. The official White House envelope had arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered by a postal worker who seemed just as curious about its contents as Catherine was. Inside was an invitation that took her breath away. The First Lady's office was organizing a special event to honor outstanding educators across America, and Catherine had been selected as one of 12 teachers to be personally recognized. Catherine's journey to this moment had not been easy. Born in the small town of Millfield, Ohio, she was the daughter of a factory worker and a seamstress. Her parents, Robert and Marie Marks, had worked tirelessly to provide for their family, often sacrificing their own dreams to ensure Catherine and her younger brother, Michael, could pursue theirs. Money was always tight, and luxuries were few, but love filled every corner of their small home. From an early age, Catherine showed a natural gift for connecting with children. While other teenagers spent their summers at the mall or hanging out with friends, Catherine volunteered at the local community center, helping children with their homework and organizing reading programs. Her mother would often find her in the evening, surrounded by books and lesson plans, preparing activities for the next day's volunteer work. When it came time for college, Catherine's family faced a difficult financial reality. State universities were expensive, and scholarships were competitive. Catherine worked 3 part-time jobs throughout her senior year of high school, saving every penny she could. She cleaned offices in the early morning, tutored children after school, and worked weekends at the local grocery store. Her guidance counselor, Mrs. Henderson, became her advocate, helping her apply for every available scholarship and grant. The acceptance letter from Ohio State University came with a partial scholarship, but it still wasn't enough to cover all expenses. Catherine's parents made the difficult decision to take out a second mortgage on their home to help fund her education. The weight of their sacrifice never left Catherine's shoulders, and she promised herself that she would make their investment worthwhile. College life was a constant balance between academics and work. While her classmates enjoyed social gatherings and campus activities, Catherine spent most evenings in the library or at her job in the campus bookstore. Her education major required extensive fieldwork in local schools, and it was during these placements that Catherine truly discovered her calling. She was assigned to Lincoln Elementary, a school in one of Columbus's most challenging neighborhoods. The building was old and underfunded, with peeling paint on the walls and outdated textbooks that had been used by countless students over the years. Many of the children came from single-parent homes or families struggling with poverty, addiction, or other hardships that made learning difficult. Catherine's supervising teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, had been at Lincoln for 15 years. She was a woman of immense patience and creativity, finding ways to make learning exciting despite the limited resources. Under her guidance, Catherine learned that teaching wasn't just about delivering information, it was about understanding each child's unique story and finding ways to reach them where they were. One student, in particular, changed Catherine's perspective forever. Marcus was an 8-year-old boy who rarely spoke and seemed withdrawn from his classmates. His clothes were often too small or dirty, and he frequently fell asleep during lessons. Other student teachers might have seen him as a problem to be managed, but Catherine saw a child in need of care and attention. She began staying after school to work with Marcus, helping him with reading and arithmetic. Slowly, she learned his story. His mother worked 2 jobs to support 3 children, and Marcus often went home to an empty house where he was responsible for caring for his younger siblings. He was tired not because he was lazy, but because he was carrying responsibilities far beyond his years. Catherine started bringing extra snacks to share with Marcus and his classmates, and she worked with the school counselor to connect his family with local resources. She created engaging lessons that captured the children's attention and made learning feel like play rather than work. Her innovative approaches began to make a real difference in her students' academic performance and enthusiasm for school. Word of Catherine's dedication and creativity spread throughout the education department at Ohio State. Her professors took notice of her exceptional field reports and the glowing recommendations from her supervising teachers. When it came time for student teaching, Catherine requested to return to Lincoln Elementary, despite having opportunities at more well-funded suburban schools. Her student teaching experience at Lincoln was transformative for both Catherine and her students. She implemented new reading programs, organized family literacy nights, and even started a small garden project that taught children about science and nutrition while providing fresh vegetables for families in need. The principal, Dr. Williams, was so impressed with Catherine's work that she offered her a full-time position before she had even graduated. Catherine's college graduation was a bittersweet moment. Her parents sat in the audience, their faces beaming with pride despite the financial struggles they had endured to make this day possible. Catherine walked across the stage knowing that she had achieved something her family had only dreamed of, but she also understood that her real work was just beginning. Her first year of full-time teaching at Lincoln Elementary was both exhilarating and exhausting. Catherine threw herself into her work with the same dedication she had shown as a volunteer and student teacher. She arrived early and stayed late, constantly looking for new ways to engage her students and support their families. She used her own money to buy classroom supplies when the school budget fell short, and she spent weekends visiting students' homes to better understand their challenges and strengths. The second-grade classroom that became Catherine's domain was a reflection of her personality, warm, colorful, and filled with books. She transformed the sterile space into a learning environment where children felt safe to take risks, make mistakes, and grow. Every wall told a story of her students' achievements, from their first attempts at writing to their proudest art projects. Catherine's teaching methods were unconventional but effective. She integrated music, movement, and hands-on activities into traditional subjects, recognizing that children learn differently and need multiple ways to access information. Her math lessons might involve cooking simple recipes to teach fractions, or her science units might include building birdhouses to study animal habitats. The results spoke for themselves. Catherine's students consistently showed improvement not just in test scores, but in their confidence and love of learning. Parents who had previously felt disconnected from their children's education began attending school events and volunteering in the classroom. Other teachers sought Catherine's advice on engaging reluctant learners and working with challenging behaviors. As years passed, Catherine's reputation grew beyond the walls of Lincoln Elementary. She began presenting at educational conferences, sharing her strategies for teaching in high-need schools. She mentored new teachers and served on district committees focused on improving educational outcomes for disadvantaged students. Despite offers to transfer to schools with better resources and higher pay, Catherine remained committed to Lincoln and the community she had grown to love. Her personal life, however, required sacrifices. Long hours at school and weekends spent on lesson planning left little time for dating or socializing. Catherine's close friends from college had moved to different cities or started families, and she often felt isolated despite being surrounded by colleagues and students who admired her work. The relationship that mattered most to Catherine was with her brother Michael. 2 years younger than Catherine, Michael had followed a different path after high school. While Catherine pursued education, Michael enlisted in the military, serving 2 tours overseas before returning home to start a family. His experiences in the service had changed him, and Catherine worried about the distance that seemed to grow between them despite their shared history and love for each other. Their parents, now in their 60s, faced health challenges that added stress to the family dynamic. Robert's years in the factory had taken a toll on his body, and he struggled with arthritis and back pain that made working difficult. Marie had developed diabetes and high blood pressure, conditions that required constant monitoring and expensive medications. Catherine found herself sending money home regularly to help with medical bills and household expenses, further limiting her own financial freedom. Despite these challenges, Catherine never regretted her career choice. Every small victory in her classroom reminded her why she had become a teacher. When Marcus, her former student from her college days, graduated from high school and enlisted in the Air Force, he credited Catherine with believing in him when no one else did. When parents told her that their children came home excited about learning for the first time, she knew her work mattered. It was during her 8th year of teaching that Catherine's dedication to education caught the attention of state officials. Ohio was implementing new literacy initiatives, and they needed experienced teachers to help develop pilot programs in high-need schools. Catherine was selected to participate in a statewide committee that would shape educational policy for years to come. The committee work required Catherine to travel throughout Ohio, visiting schools and meeting with educators from diverse backgrounds. She saw firsthand how different communities approached education and began to understand the broader systemic issues that affected student achievement. Her voice became one of many advocating for increased funding, better resources, and more support for teachers working in challenging environments. Catherine's involvement in state educational initiatives led to recognition from national organizations. She received awards for her innovative teaching methods and her advocacy for students living in poverty. Each accolade felt surreal to Catherine, who still saw herself as simply doing the job she loved rather than accomplishing anything extraordinary. It was this national recognition that ultimately led to the letter from the White House. Catherine's work had been noticed by officials in the Department of Education, who recommended her for the First Lady's special recognition event. The invitation explained that she would join 11 other educators for a ceremony honoring their contributions to American education, followed by a private reception where they would have the opportunity to meet First Lady Melania Trump personally. Catherine read the letter 3 times before its meaning fully sank in. She called her parents immediately, her voice shaking with excitement as she shared the news. Her mother cried tears of joy, and her father's voice cracked with emotion as he told Catherine how proud he was of everything she had accomplished. Michael, despite the distance that sometimes separated them, was equally thrilled and promised to take time off work to celebrate with the family when Catherine returned from Washington. The weeks leading up to the White House visit were filled with preparation and anticipation. Catherine had never been to Washington, D.C., and the thought of walking through the halls of the White House seemed impossible to believe. She researched everything she could about White House protocol, appropriate attire, and the history of the building she would soon visit. Shopping for appropriate clothing proved to be a challenge on Catherine's teacher's salary. She visited several department stores, looking for something professional yet elegant that would be suitable for meeting the First Lady. Her mother insisted on accompanying her, and together they finally found the navy blue dress that now hung in Catherine's closet. It wasn't expensive, but it was dignified and made Catherine feel confident. The night before her departure, Catherine couldn't sleep. She lay in bed thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment, from her childhood in Millfield to her classroom at Lincoln Elementary to the incredible opportunity that awaited her in Washington. She thought about all the students she had taught over the years, the families she had worked with, and the colleagues who had supported her along the way. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Catherine whispered a prayer of gratitude for the path her life had taken. Tomorrow would mark not just a personal milestone, but a recognition of the importance of education and the teachers who dedicate their lives to shaping the future. Catherine Marks, the small-town girl who had never imagined such possibilities, was about to meet the First Lady of the United States. The alarm clock rang at 5 in the morning, and Catherine's new day began. As she took one final look at herself in the mirror, she saw not just a nervous teacher preparing for an incredible experience, but a woman who had overcome challenges, pursued her dreams, and made a difference in the lives of countless children. Today, Catherine Marks would represent not only herself, but every teacher who had ever believed in the power of education to change lives. The taxi would arrive in 30 minutes to take her to the airport, where she would board a plane to Washington, D.C. The butterflies in her stomach reminded her that this was really happening. Catherine Marks was going to the White House, and her life would never be quite the same. The airplane seat felt smaller than Catherine had expected, and she gripped the armrests as the plane lifted off from Columbus. She had only flown twice before in her life, both times for educational conferences within Ohio. This journey to Washington, D.C., felt monumentally different. The clouds below looked like cotton balls scattered across a blue canvas, and Catherine tried to calm her nerves by focusing on the peaceful view outside her window. Sitting beside her was another teacher, Maria Santos, who was also part of the group being honored by the First Lady. Maria taught at an elementary school in Phoenix, Arizona, where she had developed programs to support English language learners. The two women had met at the gate and discovered they shared similar backgrounds and experiences in education. Maria's warm personality and gentle sense of humor helped ease Catherine's anxiety as they flew toward their destination. Maria told Catherine about her own journey to teaching, which had begun when she immigrated to the United States from Mexico as a child. Her family had struggled with language barriers and financial hardships, experiences that later motivated her to become an educator focused on helping immigrant children succeed in American schools. Like Catherine, Maria had faced skepticism from those who questioned whether children from disadvantaged backgrounds could achieve at high levels. The conversation between the two women flowed naturally as they shared stories from their classrooms. Maria laughed as Catherine described her unconventional math lessons, and Catherine was impressed by Maria's innovative approach to helping children maintain their cultural identity while learning English. They discovered that despite working thousands of miles apart, they faced many of the same challenges and celebrated similar victories. When the plane touched down at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, Catherine felt her heart rate increase. The nation's capital stretched out before them, with monuments and government buildings visible in the distance. Everything seemed larger and more important than Catherine had imagined. The weight of where she was and why she was there settled heavily on her shoulders. The airport was bustling with travelers, politicians, and tourists from around the world. Catherine and Maria collected their luggage and followed signs to the ground transportation area. A White House staff member, a young woman named Jessica, met them at the designated pickup point. Jessica held a small sign with their names and greeted them with a professional smile that immediately put them at ease. The ride to their hotel took them through the heart of Washington, D.C. Catherine pressed her face to the window like a child seeing snow for the first time. The Capitol building dominated the skyline, its dome gleaming white against the afternoon sky. The Washington Monument stood tall and proud, surrounded by tourists taking photographs and children flying kites on the National Mall. Jessica pointed out various landmarks as they drove, sharing brief histories and interesting facts about the buildings they passed. Catherine was particularly moved when they drove past the Lincoln Memorial, thinking about the great president who had believed so deeply in the importance of education for all Americans. She wondered what Lincoln would think about the progress the country had made, and the work that still needed to be done. The hotel where Catherine and Maria would be staying was elegant but not ostentatious. Located just a few blocks from the White House, it had housed countless visitors to the nation's capital over the years. The lobby was decorated with photographs of famous guests and historic moments, creating an atmosphere that reminded visitors of the significance of their location. Catherine's room was on the 7th floor, with a view that included a partial glimpse of the White House through the trees. She stood at the window for several minutes, trying to absorb the reality of her situation. Tomorrow morning, she would walk through the gates of the most famous house in America. Tomorrow afternoon, she would shake hands with the First Lady of the United States. The evening was free for the honored teachers to explore the city or rest before the next day's events. Catherine and Maria decided to take a walking tour of the National Mall, joining the thousands of visitors who came daily to see the monuments and museums that represented American history and values. Their first stop was the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, where Catherine was moved to tears by the names etched into the black granite wall. She thought about her brother Michael and the friends he had lost during his military service. The wall seemed to hold the weight of countless stories, each name representing a life cut short and a family forever changed by loss. From there, they walked to the Lincoln Memorial, climbing the steps that had been worn smooth by millions of visitors over the decades. Inside, the massive statue of Abraham Lincoln looked down with an expression that seemed both stern and compassionate. Catherine read the Gettysburg Address carved into the wall, thinking about Lincoln's words about government of the people, by the people, for the people. She wondered if modern America still lived up to that ideal. The two teachers spent time at the World War II Memorial, reading the inscriptions that honored the sacrifice of the greatest generation. They visited the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, where Catherine was particularly struck by the quotes carved into the stone. Dr. King's words about education being the most powerful weapon for changing the world resonated deeply with both women, who had dedicated their lives to that very principle. As evening approached, Catherine and Maria found a small restaurant near their hotel where they could have dinner and continue their conversations about teaching and life. The restaurant was filled with people from all walks of life, tourists comparing photos from their day of sightseeing, government workers discussing policy matters over dinner, and families enjoying evening meals together. Catherine ordered a simple pasta dish, but found she was too nervous to eat much. Her stomach was filled with butterflies, and every time she thought about the next day's events, her appetite disappeared. Maria noticed Catherine's nervousness and shared her own experiences with anxiety before important events. She told Catherine that feeling nervous was normal and even healthy, as it showed how much the opportunity meant to her. After dinner, the two women returned to the hotel, where they met several of the other teachers who would be honored alongside them. The group included educators from across the country, each with their own inspiring story of dedication to students and communities. There was Robert from Alaska, who taught in a remote village accessible only by plane or snowmobile. Sarah from Louisiana had rebuilt her school's program after Hurricane Katrina devastated her community. James from California had developed innovative programs for students with learning disabilities. As the teachers shared their stories in the hotel lobby, Catherine realized that she was part of a remarkable group of individuals who had all chosen to dedicate their lives to education despite the challenges and obstacles they faced. Each person had overcome different difficulties, but they were united by their commitment to students and their belief in the power of education to transform lives. The conversation continued late into the evening, with teachers comparing notes on everything from classroom management techniques to dealing with difficult parents to finding creative solutions for limited resources. Catherine found herself laughing more than she had in months, surrounded by people who truly understood the joys and frustrations of her profession. When she finally returned to her room, Catherine tried calling her parents to share her experiences from the day. The phone rang several times before her mother answered, sounding tired but excited to hear Catherine's voice. Catherine described the monuments she had seen, the other teachers she had met, and her growing anticipation for the next day's events. Her father got on the phone to tell Catherine how proud he was of her accomplishments. His voice was thick with emotion as he reminded her that she was representing not just herself, but their entire family and community. He told her to hold her head high and remember that she deserved to be there just as much as anyone else. After hanging up, Catherine tried to prepare for bed, but sleep seemed impossible. She had brought a book to read, but found herself unable to concentrate on the words. Instead, she stood at her window, looking out at the lights of Washington, D.C., and thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. Catherine thought about her students back at Lincoln Elementary, who were probably asleep in their beds, unaware that their teacher was in the nation's capital preparing to meet the First Lady. She thought about Marcus, who was now serving in the Air Force, and all the other children whose lives she had touched over the years. She thought about her parents, who had sacrificed so much to give her the opportunity to pursue her dreams. The weight of representation felt heavy on Catherine's shoulders. She understood that she was not just Catherine Marks from Millfield, Ohio, but a symbol of all the teachers who worked tirelessly in challenging circumstances to make a difference in children's lives. She was representing every educator who had ever stayed late to help a struggling student, every teacher who had used their own money to buy classroom supplies, every professional who had chosen education despite the low pay and limited resources. Catherine also thought about the privilege of her situation. How many teachers across the country deserved this same recognition but would never receive it? How many educators were doing equally important work in their communities but would never get the chance to have their efforts acknowledged at the highest levels of government? The randomness of her selection both humbled and motivated her. She pulled out a small notebook and began writing down her thoughts and feelings about the experience. Catherine had always been a writer, keeping journals throughout her teaching career to document funny moments with students, breakthrough experiences in learning, and personal reflections on her work. Tonight's entry would be different from any she had written before. As she wrote, Catherine found herself thinking about what she wanted to say if given the opportunity to speak with the First Lady. What message would she want to convey about education in America? What challenges did teachers face that policymakers might not fully understand? What successes could she share that might inspire continued support for public education? Catherine wrote about the importance of seeing each student as an individual with unique needs, strengths, and potential. She wrote about the creativity required to teach effectively with limited resources, and the dedication of teachers who went far beyond their job descriptions to support their students and communities. She wrote about the joy of watching a child discover their love of reading, or master a concept they had struggled with for weeks. She also wrote about the challenges that kept her awake at night. The students who came to school hungry or tired because of problems at home. The lack of funding for supplies and programs that could make a real difference in children's lives. The pressure of standardized testing that sometimes forced teachers to focus on test preparation rather than inspiring genuine love of learning. As Catherine wrote, she began to feel a sense of purpose beyond her own nervousness and excitement. Tomorrow's event was not just about her personal achievement, but about representing the voice of educators across the country. She had been given a platform, however brief, to speak for teachers who rarely had their perspectives heard at the highest levels of government. The clock on Catherine's bedside table showed well past midnight when she finally closed her notebook. Tomorrow would bring new experiences, new challenges, and new opportunities. She said a quiet prayer for strength, wisdom, and the ability to represent her profession with dignity and grace. Catherine finally fell asleep thinking about her students and the difference that good teachers could make in their lives. She dreamed about her classroom at Lincoln Elementary, filled with eager faces and the energy that came from children who were excited to learn. In her dream, the First Lady visited her school, sitting in the reading circle as Catherine's second graders shared their favorite books and explained what they had learned that day. When Catherine woke the next morning, she felt a sense of calm that had been absent the day before. The nervousness was still there, but it was accompanied by confidence and determination. Today, Catherine Marks would represent not just herself, but every teacher who had ever believed that education could change the world. Today, she would meet the First Lady of the United States and share the story of American educators who were making a difference every single day in classrooms across the country. The sun was shining through her hotel room window, and Washington, D.C., looked beautiful and welcoming. Catherine Marks was ready for the most important day of her professional life. Catherine woke before her alarm, her body naturally responding to the excitement and anticipation that had been building for weeks. The morning light filtered through the hotel curtains, casting a golden glow across her room. She lay still for a moment, listening to the sounds of Washington, D.C., awakening outside her window. Today was the day she would meet First Lady Melania Trump. The shower water felt refreshing against her skin, washing away the remnants of a restless night's sleep. Catherine took her time getting ready, wanting to look her absolute best for this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. She carefully applied makeup, styled her hair, and slipped into the navy blue dress that had taken so much consideration to choose. Looking at herself in the full-length mirror, Catherine saw a professional educator ready to represent her colleagues with pride and dignity. Breakfast in the hotel restaurant was a quiet affair. Catherine sat with Maria and several other honored teachers, but conversation was subdued as each person dealt with their own pre-event nerves. Catherine managed to eat some toast and drink a cup of coffee, though her stomach remained fluttery with excitement. The other teachers seemed equally affected by the magnitude of what lay ahead. At exactly 9 o'clock, the White House staff members arrived to escort the group to their destination. Jessica, whom Catherine had met the previous day, was accompanied by 2 other officials who would help coordinate the day's events. They provided final instructions about security procedures, photography protocols, and the general schedule for the morning and afternoon activities. The walk to the White House took only 15 minutes, but, for Catherine, it felt both endless and over too quickly. The streets of Washington buzzed with the usual morning activity, government workers heading to their offices, tourists beginning their sightseeing adventures, and security personnel maintaining their watchful presence throughout the area. As they approached the White House grounds, Catherine felt her breath catch in her throat. The iconic building looked exactly as she had seen it in countless photographs and television broadcasts, yet experiencing it in person was completely different. The white columns gleamed in the morning sunlight, and the perfectly manicured lawn stretched out like a green carpet welcoming them to the most famous residence in America. Security screening was thorough but professional. Catherine and her colleagues passed through metal detectors, had their bags searched, and provided identification multiple times. The Secret Service agents were courteous but serious, and Catherine felt both safe and slightly intimidated by the level of protection surrounding the first family's home. Once inside the White House, Catherine was struck by the grandeur and history that surrounded her. Every room told stories of the presidents and first families who had lived and worked within these walls. The furniture was elegant and timeless, the artwork was museum quality, and the attention to detail in every element of decoration was remarkable. Their first stop was the Blue Room, where the group would wait before the formal ceremony began. Catherine had read about this famous room in her preparation for the visit, but seeing it in person was breathtaking. The blue silk wall coverings, the ornate chandelier, and the formal portraits of past presidents created an atmosphere of dignity and historical significance. A White House curator provided a brief history of the room and pointed out several pieces of particular interest. Catherine learned that the room had been used for various purposes throughout the years, hosting everything from formal receptions to intimate family gatherings. She tried to imagine the conversations that had taken place in this very space, the decisions that had been made, and the history that had been shaped within these walls. Other honored educators began arriving, completing the group of 12 teachers who would be recognized that day. Catherine met Jennifer from Montana, who taught in a one-room schoolhouse that served children from kindergarten through 8th grade. There was David from Florida, who had developed innovative programs for students affected by natural disasters. Each teacher brought unique experiences and perspectives, yet they all shared the common thread of extraordinary dedication to their students. As the group waited, they were served refreshments and had the opportunity to continue getting acquainted. Catherine found herself in conversation with Patricia, a veteran teacher from inner-city Detroit who had spent 30 years transforming the lives of children in one of the most challenging urban environments in the country. Patricia's stories of persistence, creativity, and hope inspired Catherine and reminded her of why she had chosen education as her calling. The formal ceremony took place in the East Room, the largest room in the White House and the site of many historic events. Catherine and her colleagues were seated in the front rows, facing a small podium where they would be individually recognized for their contributions to American education. Family members and guests filled the remaining chairs, creating an audience of about 75 people. Catherine's parents had been invited to attend, but the cost of travel from Ohio and her father's health concerns had made the trip impossible. She carried their love and support with her, knowing they would be watching the live stream from their living room in Millfield. Her brother Michael had taken the day off work specifically to watch the ceremony with their parents, making the experience feel like a true family celebration despite the physical distance. When the First Lady entered the room, Catherine felt a surge of emotion that surprised her. Melania Trump moved with grace and elegance, her presence commanding attention without seeming to demand it. She was smaller in person than Catherine had expected, but her bearing and confidence filled the space around her. The First Lady's smile seemed genuine and warm as she acknowledged the honored guests and their families. The ceremony began with remarks from the Secretary of Education, who spoke about the crucial role teachers play in shaping America's future. The Secretary highlighted the challenges facing public education and praised the innovative approaches being implemented by educators like those being honored that day. Catherine felt proud to be included among such distinguished company. First Lady Trump then took the podium to address the group. Her accent added a unique quality to her words as she spoke about her own experiences with education, both as a student and as a mother. She emphasized the importance of supporting teachers and providing them with the resources they needed to succeed. Her remarks were heartfelt and demonstrated a genuine understanding of the challenges educators face daily. The individual recognition portion of the ceremony was the most emotional part for Catherine. Each teacher was called forward to receive a personalized certificate and to have a brief moment with the First Lady. Catherine watched as her colleagues approached the podium, each representing different aspects of American education but all embodying the dedication and passion that characterized the teaching profession at its best. When Catherine's name was called, she felt her legs shake slightly as she stood and walked toward the First Lady. The few steps felt like a mile, and Catherine was conscious of the photographers capturing every moment for posterity. As she approached, First Lady Trump extended her hand with a genuine smile that immediately put Catherine at ease. The handshake was firm and warm, and the First Lady's eyes made direct contact with Catherine's as she offered congratulations on her outstanding work. Catherine managed to thank her for the honor and briefly mentioned her students at Lincoln Elementary. The First Lady expressed interest in Catherine's work with children in challenging circumstances and encouraged her to continue making a difference in their lives. The certificate Catherine received was beautifully designed and personalized with her name and accomplishments. As she held it in her hands, Catherine thought about all the people who had helped her reach this moment: her parents who had sacrificed for her education, her teachers who had inspired her, her colleagues who had supported her, and, most importantly, her students who had motivated her to continually strive for excellence. The formal ceremony concluded with a group photograph of all the honored teachers with the First Lady. Catherine found herself standing directly next to Mrs. Trump, still hardly believing that this experience was real. The photographer took several shots to ensure they captured the perfect image, and Catherine tried to maintain her composure while internally celebrating this incredible milestone. Following the ceremony, the group was invited to a private reception in the state dining room. This more informal gathering allowed for longer conversations and a chance to learn more about each other's work and experiences. Catherine found herself in small groups with different educators, sharing stories and strategies while enjoying elegant refreshments served on White House china. During the reception, First Lady Trump moved among the guests, spending a few minutes with each honored teacher. When she approached Catherine, their conversation lasted nearly 10 minutes. Catherine shared more details about her work at Lincoln Elementary, describing the challenges her students faced and the innovative approaches she used to engage them in learning. The First Lady was particularly interested in Catherine's literacy programs and her efforts to involve families in their children's education. She asked thoughtful questions about the community Catherine served and the resources that would be most helpful for schools in similar situations. Catherine felt heard and valued as she explained her work, and she sensed that the First Lady's interest was genuine rather than merely polite. Catherine also had the opportunity to speak with the First Lady about the importance of supporting teachers emotionally and professionally. She explained how isolation and burnout affected many educators, particularly those working in high-need schools. Mrs. Trump listened attentively and asked about programs that might help address these challenges. The conversation turned to the broader issues affecting American education, including funding disparities, the challenges of standardized testing, and the need for more resources to support students living in poverty. Catherine was impressed by the First Lady's knowledge of these issues and her apparent commitment to understanding the complexities of public education. As their conversation continued, Catherine began to see beyond the public persona to the individual woman who genuinely cared about children and education. Mrs. Trump shared some of her own experiences as a mother and her concerns about ensuring that all children have access to quality education regardless of their circumstances. The authenticity of her concern was evident in her questions and responses. The First Lady also spoke about her own background and the value her family had placed on education throughout her life. She mentioned the teachers who had influenced her development and expressed gratitude for educators like Catherine who were making similar impacts on children today. This personal connection to teaching and learning made their conversation feel more like a discussion between two people who shared common values rather than a formal political interaction. When other guests approached to speak with the First Lady, Catherine stepped back but remained close enough to observe the interactions. She was struck by how Mrs. Trump engaged with each teacher individually, asking specific questions about their work and showing genuine interest in their responses. It was clear that she had done her homework about each honoree and came to the event well prepared to have meaningful conversations. Catherine spent the remainder of the reception talking with her fellow educators and reflecting on the morning's experiences. She exchanged contact information with several teachers, hoping to maintain the connections they had made and perhaps collaborate on future projects. The sense of community among the group was strong, and Catherine felt like she was part of a special network of educators who could support each other's work. As the reception drew to a close, Catherine realized that this experience had exceeded all of her expectations. Not only had she been honored for her work, but she had also gained new perspectives on education policy, made valuable professional connections, and had the opportunity to represent teachers everywhere in conversations with the First Lady. The formal events concluded with another group photograph, this one more relaxed and informal than the ceremony picture. Catherine felt comfortable and confident as the cameras captured what would become one of the most treasured images of her life. Standing in the state dining room of the White House, surrounded by fellow educators and, having just spent meaningful time with the First Lady, Catherine understood that this day would serve as inspiration for the rest of her career. As the honored teachers prepared to leave the White House, Catherine took one last look around the state dining room. The elegant space had hosted countless important gatherings throughout American history, and now it had been the setting for her own milestone moment. She felt grateful for the opportunity to have been part of this tradition of recognizing excellence in education. Walking back through the White House hallways toward the exit, Catherine reflected on how much her perspective had changed in just a few hours. The building that had seemed intimidating that morning now felt welcoming and inspiring. The First Lady, who had been an abstract figure from television and magazines, had become a real person with whom Catherine had shared genuine conversation and connection. The experience had reinforced Catherine's belief in the importance of her work while also opening her eyes to the broader policy discussions affecting education nationwide. She felt energized and motivated to return to her classroom with renewed passion and new ideas for supporting her students and colleagues. As Catherine stepped outside the White House and back onto the streets of Washington, D.C., she knew that her life had been changed forever. The shy girl from Millfield, Ohio, had just spent the morning with the First Lady of the United States, representing thousands of dedicated teachers across the country. This milestone would inspire her work for years to come. The afternoon following the White House ceremony felt surreal to Catherine as she and the other honored teachers were given a guided tour of the Capitol building. Walking through the halls where American democracy had been shaped for more than 2 centuries, Catherine continued to process the morning's extraordinary experiences. The conversations with First Lady Trump replayed in her mind as she tried to absorb every detail before returning to her regular life in Ohio. The Capitol tour guide, a knowledgeable historian named Mr. Richardson, led the group through the rotunda, where massive paintings depicted pivotal moments in American history. Catherine stood before the painting of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, thinking about the courage it had taken for those early Americans to envision a nation built on principles of freedom and opportunity. She wondered what those founding fathers would think about public education today and the role teachers played in preserving democratic ideals. In the House chamber, Catherine sat in the gallery where citizens could observe their elected representatives at work. The room was empty except for maintenance staff preparing for the next session, but Catherine could imagine the passionate debates and crucial decisions that had taken place in this space. She thought about the legislation affecting education that had been discussed and voted upon in this very room, and she felt a new appreciation for the political process that shaped her profession. Maria Santos, who had become Catherine's closest friend among the honored teachers, sat beside her in the gallery. The two women had formed a bond that transcended their different backgrounds and geographic locations. Maria whispered to Catherine about her plans to implement some of the ideas they had discussed, including a pen pal program that would connect their students across state lines. Catherine was excited about the possibility of her Ohio students learning about life in Arizona while Maria's students discovered what winter looked like in the Midwest. The Senate chamber was equally impressive, with its rich red carpeting and ornate decorations. Catherine learned that this room had witnessed some of the most important debates in American history, from decisions about slavery and civil rights to declarations of war and votes for peace. She felt the weight of history surrounding her and understood more clearly how her work as a teacher connected to the larger story of American progress. After the Capitol tour, the group was taken to the Smithsonian National Museum of American History, where they had a private viewing of the education exhibits. Catherine was fascinated by the evolution of teaching methods and classroom technology over the decades. She saw examples of one-room schoolhouses from the 1800s, early textbooks used in immigrant communities, and displays showing how integration had changed American education in the 1960s. One exhibit particularly caught Catherine's attention, a recreation of a classroom from the 1940s, complete with wooden desks, slate boards, and primers used to teach reading. She thought about her grandmother, who had attended school during that era, walking miles each day to reach a building not much different from what she was observing. The challenges faced by students and teachers had changed over the generations, but the fundamental mission remained the same: to help children learn and grow. The museum also featured modern innovations in education, including interactive displays and computer-based learning tools. Catherine experimented with some of the technology, imagining how these resources might benefit her students back at Lincoln Elementary. She made mental notes about grant opportunities she might pursue to bring similar technology to her classroom, knowing that her students deserved access to the same tools available in wealthier districts. As the afternoon continued, Catherine found herself in deeper conversations with her fellow educators about the challenges and opportunities facing American schools. Robert from Alaska described the unique difficulties of teaching in a remote village where supplies had to be flown in and where many students spoke indigenous languages at home. His perspective helped Catherine understand that while her urban challenges were significant, rural educators faced equally complex obstacles in different forms. Sarah from Louisiana shared her experiences rebuilding her school program after Hurricane Katrina had devastated her community. Her stories of resilience and determination inspired Catherine and reminded her that teachers often served as beacons of hope and stability for children experiencing trauma and uncertainty. Sarah's work with displaced students had taught her valuable lessons about helping children cope with change and loss. James from California discussed his innovative programs for students with learning disabilities, describing techniques he had developed to help children who struggled with traditional teaching methods. His passion for ensuring that every child could succeed, regardless of their learning style or challenges, resonated deeply with Catherine. She thought about several students in her own classes who might benefit from some of James's strategies. Jennifer from Montana, who taught in the one-room schoolhouse, shared the unique advantages of multi-age learning environments. She explained how older students naturally became mentors and teachers for younger ones, creating a family-like atmosphere that supported academic and social development. Catherine was intrigued by this model and wondered how she might incorporate peer teaching strategies into her own classroom. Patricia from Detroit, the veteran teacher who had spent 3 decades in urban education, offered perspectives that came only from years of experience. She had seen educational trends come and go, had worked under numerous administrators and policy changes, and had maintained her enthusiasm for teaching throughout it all. Her wisdom and practical advice gave Catherine insights into how to sustain a long career in education without burning out. David from Florida described his work with students affected by natural disasters, helping children process trauma while continuing their education in temporary facilities. His emergency preparedness strategies and crisis counseling techniques provided Catherine with valuable knowledge she hoped never to need but was grateful to possess. His work reminded everyone in the group that teachers often served roles far beyond academic instruction. As the day progressed, Catherine began to see herself as part of a national community of educators who were all working towards similar goals despite facing different challenges. The problems she encountered at Lincoln Elementary were not unique to her school or her city. They reflected broader issues affecting public education across the country. At the same time, the innovative solutions her colleagues had developed gave her hope and practical ideas for improving her own practice. The group's final official activity was a dinner at a restaurant near the National Mall, where they could continue their conversations in a relaxed setting. Catherine found herself seated between Maria and Patricia, continuing to learn from their experiences while sharing more details about her own work. The conversation ranged from specific teaching strategies to broader policy issues, with each educator contributing insights from their unique perspectives. During dinner, Catherine received a text message from her brother Michael, who had been watching news coverage of the White House event with their parents. The local Ohio television stations had covered Catherine's recognition, and several of her colleagues at Lincoln Elementary had seen the stories. Michael told her that their parents were overwhelmed with pride and that her principal had already called to congratulate her on representing their school so well. Catherine also learned that her students had been following the day's events through their families and social media. Several parents had contacted the school to express how proud they were that their children's teacher had been honored by the First Lady. Catherine was touched to know that her recognition reflected positively on Lincoln Elementary and the entire school community. As dinner concluded, the honored teachers exchanged final contact information and made commitments to stay in touch. They discussed plans for potential collaborations, sharing of resources, and ongoing communication about their work. Catherine felt like she was leaving Washington with not just memories of an incredible experience, but with a network of professional colleagues who could provide support and inspiration for years to come. The evening flight back to Columbus gave Catherine time to reflect on the profound impact of her Washington experience. As the plane lifted off and the lights of the nation's capital disappeared below, she began processing everything that had happened over the past 2 days. The experience had been both personally meaningful and professionally transformative. Catherine thought about her conversation with First Lady Trump and the genuine interest she had shown in the challenges facing public education. While Catherine understood that policy changes happen slowly and often involved complex political considerations, she felt encouraged that education issues were being discussed at the highest levels of government. The First Lady's knowledge of educational challenges and her apparent commitment to supporting teachers had given Catherine hope that positive changes might be possible. The recognition itself had been deeply meaningful, validating years of hard work and dedication. Catherine had chosen teaching because she believed it was important work, not because she expected recognition or rewards. However, having her efforts acknowledged by the White House had reinforced her belief that what she did mattered and that her students deserved the best education she could provide. More importantly, the experience had connected Catherine with a national community of educators who shared her passion and commitment. The conversations with her fellow teachers had given her new ideas, renewed motivation, and a broader perspective on education issues. She felt less isolated in her work and more connected to the larger mission of American public education. Catherine also thought about how the experience would affect her future work. The conversations about policy issues had given her a better understanding of the political and economic factors that affected her classroom. She felt more prepared to advocate for her students and her profession, whether in discussions with administrators, school board meetings, or community forums. The networking opportunities had been invaluable as well. Catherine now had connections with innovative educators across the country who could provide advice, collaboration opportunities, and ongoing support. She was particularly excited about the Pen Pal program she and Maria were planning, which would give their students opportunities to learn about different parts of the country while practicing their writing and communication skills. When Catherine's plane landed in Columbus, she felt like she was returning as a different person than the one who had left just 2 days earlier. The shy teacher from Millfield who had been nervous about meeting the First Lady had been replaced by a confident educator who understood her role in the larger story of American education. She felt empowered to speak up for her profession and her students in ways she had never considered before. The drive back to her apartment gave Catherine additional time to process her experiences and plan how she would share them with her students, colleagues, and community. She wanted to make sure that the benefits of her Washington trip extended beyond her personal satisfaction to create positive impacts for others. Catherine's first priority would be sharing her experiences with her students at Lincoln Elementary. She planned to tell them about meeting the First Lady and about the other teachers she had met from across the country. Most importantly, she wanted them to understand that their teacher had been chosen for this honor because of the good work they did together in their classroom every day. She also planned to write thank you letters to everyone who had supported her journey to this point, her parents who had sacrificed for her education, her former teachers who had inspired her career choice, her colleagues who had supported her innovative approaches, and her principal who had nominated her for recognition. Catherine understood that her success reflected the contributions of many people who had believed in her along the way. Catherine thought about how she would use her platform as a White House honoree to advocate for public education in her community. She planned to speak at school board meetings, write letters to local newspapers, and participate in community forums about education issues. Her recognition would give additional weight to her voice when she spoke about the needs of students and teachers. She also began planning ways to share the innovative teaching strategies she had learned from her fellow honorees. Catherine thought about organizing professional development sessions for her colleagues, writing articles for education journals, and presenting at conferences. The knowledge she had gained needed to be passed along to other educators who could benefit from these ideas. As Catherine pulled into her apartment complex parking lot, she saw her familiar neighborhood with new eyes. The modest buildings, the working families, the children playing in the yards, all of it looked the same as when she had left, but Catherine's perspective had been fundamentally changed. She understood more clearly how her local work connected to national issues and how her individual efforts contributed to the larger mission of American education. Catherine carried her luggage upstairs to her apartment, where she carefully hung up the navy blue dress that had witnessed history. She placed her White House certificate in a frame and positioned it where she would see it every morning as she prepared for work. The certificate would serve as a daily reminder of her commitment to excellence and her responsibility to represent her profession with dignity. Before going to bed, Catherine called her parents to share more details about her experiences. Her mother cried tears of joy as Catherine described meeting the First Lady and the conversations about education policy. Her father's voice was filled with pride as he told Catherine how their entire community was celebrating her achievement. Michael had apparently organized a small gathering of family friends to watch the news coverage, turning Catherine's recognition into a community celebration. As Catherine finally settled into bed in her familiar room, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this point. From a working-class childhood in Millfield to a career serving disadvantaged students in urban Ohio to recognition by the First Lady of the United States, Catherine's path had been shaped by dedication, perseverance, and the support of countless others who had believed in her potential. The experience had confirmed Catherine's belief that teaching was more than a job, it was a calling that required passion, creativity, and unwavering commitment to students. Her recognition by the White House had not been about her individual accomplishments alone, but about the importance of education in American society and the need to support teachers who were making a difference every day. Catherine fell asleep that night knowing that Monday morning would bring her back to her classroom at Lincoln Elementary, where she would continue the work that had earned her this incredible honor. Her students would still face the same challenges, her resources would still be limited, and the problems of poverty and inequality would still affect her community. However, Catherine herself had been transformed by her Washington experience, and that transformation would benefit everyone she served. The shy girl from Millfield, Ohio, had become a national advocate for education, a representative of thousands of dedicated teachers, and a symbol of what was possible when individuals pursued their calling with passion and determination. Catherine Marks had indeed marked a milestone, not just in her own life, but in the ongoing story of American education and the teachers who shaped the future one student at a time.